Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Lim. I am a board-certified family physician. I am also an attorney licensed to practice in the state of California. I work here as True North as one of 3 staff MDs, including Dr. Michael Clapper and Dr. Peter Sultana. I also work as the medical director of the McDougall program, which is based here in Santa Rosa. And last, I work part-time in the Department of Family Medicine at Kaiser Permanente in Santa Rosa. I see patients there 1/2 day a week, and I also teach their plant-based eating class. It is a monthly support group, and it was started by a cardiologist, Dr. Sanford Warren, 5-6 years ago. And I'm proud to say it is the #1 subscribed group in all of Kaiser Santa Rosa. We have anywhere between 40 to 60 people come out on a monthly basis. My goal today is to give you an introduction to a whole food plant-based diet, and specifically, what is a whole food plant-based diet? Why should I adopt this way of eating? And how can I get started? And before I dive into these questions, I wanted to explain why I am so passionate about this entire whole food plant-based movement, and why I can stand before you today and say that I truly believe 40 years from now I'm still going to be saying the same message. I had a traditional medical training. I trained at Boston University School of Medicine from 2006 to 2010. And after that, I came out to Santa Rosa and trained at the Santa Rosa Family Medicine Residency from 2010 to 2013. And during those 7 years of med school and residency, success looked like this for me. Success looked like having a patient with type 2 diabetes and helping them to bring their blood sugar levels to less than 150 with the aid of medications such as metformin or glipizide, or in some cases insulin. Success looked like having patients with high blood pressure in the 160s over 100s and helping them to reduce their blood pressure to less than 140 over 90. Again, typically with the aid of medications such as lisinopril or hydrochlorothiazide or chlorthalidone or amlodipine. Success looked like having patients with high cholesterol of over 200 and helping them to lower their total cholesterol levels to less than 200, oftentimes with the aid of medications such as Lipitor or Crestor or Simvastatin. Home runs during my training were when we would help overweight patients lose 5% of their body weight. So someone coming in at 300 pounds, okay? If we could help them lose 15 pounds, we would encourage them and say that this could improve your diabetes or improve your blood sugar levels and cholesterol. And those were rare, but when those happened, we celebrated. In contrast, since becoming a physician who practices whole food plant-based medicine and helping people to change their overall health simply by what they put at the end of the fork, I have witnessed nothing short of complete transformations. This is Robert Smith. He gave me permission to use his name and his picture and share his story. This was in 2014. He weighed 298 pounds. His blood pressure was in the 140s over 90s, and he was taking multiple medications: Zetia, Norvasc, Pristiq, albuterol. Zetia is a cholesterol medication. Norvasc is a very powerful blood pressure lowering medication. Pristiq is an antidepressant. Albuterol is for asthma. And at his activity level, he was sedentary. He said he would have too much pain in his joints, such as his knees, to walk very far at all. These pictures were taken at a wedding that he and his wife attended, and he told me that when he looked at these pictures, he had reached that point where he said, enough is enough. I can't continue on this way. And he went online and did some research and essentially learned about whole food plant-based diet and all the evidence in favor of it, and he decided to go ahead and try it. So this is him today. Wow. This is him 3 years later. Today, he is 173 pounds. His blood pressure is in the 110s over 70s, and this is off all medication. He is no longer on his cholesterol-lowering medication. He is no longer on his blood pressure-lowering medication. He is no longer on his antidepressant, so his mood has improved along with his overall health. And he no longer uses albuterol. I had to catch him. This picture is catching him before he was about to go for his morning 5-mile run. He went from completely sedentary to first thing he wakes up in the morning going for a 5-mile run. I chose Robert specifically because this is not 2 months, this is not 4 months, this is 3 years later. This is change that is sustainable and long-term. And if I had an interview of him and you could hear him, you can sense that this is a permanent life change for him. This is not a diet that he's going on and then going off. He is eating this way for the rest of his life. I took care of Robert Smith at True North just a few months ago. Well, let's look at a patient of mine from the McDougall program. This is Josh Meyer. He describes himself as a Nebraska meat eater. Okay? These two pictures of him were taken at the November 2015 McDougall Employee Program. And let me explain a little bit about the employee program. So Dr. McDougall, who is a pioneer in the field of plant-based medicine and a mentor of mine who I'm extremely indebted and grateful to, he runs 10-day residential programs out of the Flamingo Hotel. People come from all around the world and they stay at the Flamingo Hotel for 10 days, and there they get medical care from Dr. McDougall and myself. They hear lectures from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And most importantly, they eat the food. They eat starch-based, plant-based meals, free of meat, animal products, and oil. And Whole Foods, for the last over 5-6 years, has been sending employees of theirs from all around the nation to the McDougall program. And the fact that they've been doing it for the last 5 to 6 years gives you a sense for how successful it's been. Well, CenturyLink, which is one of the largest telecommunications company in the United States, it's a S&P 500 company, and they're the third largest telecom company after Verizon and AT&T. They decided a couple years ago, in 2015, to send their first group of employees to the program. And Josh Meyer was one of these people. So this was their first program, and these two pictures were taken of him at the program. Okay, he's a Nebraska meat eater. At this time, he weighed over 300 pounds. He had that same moment that Robert Smith had after Halloween of 2015, where he said, I can't continue on this way. And the opportunity came up to come to the McDougall program. So he came to the McDougall program, and he was still skeptical, but he decided to give it 30 days. And then at the end of 30 days, he decided to give it another 30 days. And then at the end of 60 days, he decided to give it a year. And he sent an email with his story, and this is him 1 year later. Wow. November of 2016, so this is just 4 months ago. He is no longer a Nebraska meat eater. He is a Nebraska plant eater. And he feels better than he has ever felt before. I never once in my entire 7 years of medical school and residency training witnessed a total transformation like this. The closest I ever got was seeing patients who, after bariatric surgery, maybe 1 year after bariatric surgery, lost a considerable amount of weight and came off a lot of medications. The sad part of the bariatric surgery story is that I've now seen many patients who are 4 or 5 years out from bariatric surgery and have not only put back on their original weight but are heavier, okay? Not to mention the complications that I have seen from many patients who have had bariatric surgery. So with that as sort of a segue, let's learn about what exactly is a whole food plant-based diet. Anyone know who this is? Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan, he's an author, he's a journalist, he's a food activist. He wrote this book back in 2008, In Defense of Food, an Eater's Manifesto. And he is most famous for 7 words. So first, eat food. Eat food that your grandma would recognize. So Go-Gurts, right? Go-Gurts is not a food that your grandmother would recognize. You want foods as natural and minimally processed as possible. Not too much, right? In the United States, we tend to overeat. We tend to eat till we're stuffed. to the point that we have to loosen our belt buckle and unbutton our pants. So you want to eat till you're satiated but not stuffed. And then lastly, mostly plants. Okay, and what does mostly plants look like? Well, it looks like this. The new 4 food groups in a whole food plant-based diet are whole grains, so amaranth, buckwheat, barley, oats, rye, teff, which is a whole grain from Ethiopia used to make the inera bread. Fruits, all sizes, varieties, shapes, colors. Vegetables, you're going to have your starchy vegetables and your non-starchy vegetables. So starchy vegetables would be things like potatoes and sweet potatoes and butternut squash. And then your non-starchy vegetables would be your leafy greens, your kale, your spinach, tomatoes, eggplant, cucumber. And then last, legumes, beans, peas, lentils. That's the bulk of a whole food plant-based diet. If you're deriving the vast majority of your nutrition from these 4 food groups with maybe a small amount of seeds and nuts, no more than 1 ounce a day, then that in essence is what a whole food plant-based diet looks like. So if we just look at a few pictures, it is a bowl of steel-cut oatmeal, right? This is my breakfast 85–90% of all days. I tend to use mashed sweet banana as my sweetener, so I don't even add any sugar, and then top it with some berries. I had this morning, as did my daughter, my son, and my wife. Dr. McDougall, I'm in the midst of the March 2017 program right now, and just the other day we had the McDougall pizza. Okay, and basically it's a whole wheat crust, no oil added, topped with all sorts of vegetables. And no cheese. This was my lunch last week. I brought to work barley, edamame, asparagus, bok choy, chickpeas, pinto beans. This is a salad that I had the other day from True North. Right? You see beets and carrots and cucumbers and bell peppers. This was my dinner a few days ago. Mix of brown and white rice. Normally mine would be all brown rice, but you have to compromise as a father. And my 5-year-old and 9-year-old need that little bit for now, so I work with them. So it's a combination of my brown and white rice, black beans, pinto beans, corn, some bok choy, and some mushroom. This is a sample plate from Kaiser that they put out. Again, some black beans, quinoa as your grain, and as you can see, a wide variety of vegetables. And dessert, it looks like fruit, much less on the side of ice cream and cakes and cupcakes and cookies. After a while, your palate adjusts and fruit becomes very sweet and a delectable dessert. So the question that I oftentimes get asked is this: what's the difference between a whole food plant-based diet and a vegetarian or vegan diet? Is whole food plant-based just a really long-winded fancy way of saying vegan or vegetarian? And the answer is they are very different, and I thought I would share some pictures to really highlight just how different they can be. So if I was vegan, right, I could theoretically eat this in the course of a day and still call myself vegan. I could start off my day with Wonder White bread, and I can't believe it's not butter. And I could have 4 slices of that lathered with I can't believe it's not butter, and that is a vegan breakfast. Now, of course, that has almost no fiber, so I would probably be starving by 10 a.m. in the morning. And so I'm going to reach for my vegan snack. And what better vegan snack than Oreos, right? Oreos are a vegan cookie. There's no animal product in it. So I could eat 20 Oreos as my mid-morning snack and still call myself vegan. Now, by lunchtime, I'm really hungry because I've had about 0 grams of fiber. And so I'm going to reach for my vegan pizza that I comfort myself by saying that I'm using Daiya vegan cheese, so that makes it healthy, and French fries. And that's my vegan lunch. And then for dessert, I'm going to reach for my bag of gummy bears, okay, which is vegan candy. And then I'm going to wash it all down with my vegan beverage, Coke. Now, this is only up till 1 p.m., right? And this is what I've consumed during the day, and I am vegan. There's not a single food up here that is whole food plant-based, okay? Even the French fries that are made of potatoes is no longer whole food because it's been deeply processed, right? It's been deep fried. So that really captures to me the difference between a whole food plant-based diet and veganism. You can have a vegan diet that is healthy, but you can also have a vegan diet that is very unhealthy. This is one of the other most common questions I get. How will I get adequate protein if I do not eat meat? And we don't need to look much further than the animal kingdom. Let's take the gorilla. This is from Forks Over Knives. No meat, no problem. The gorilla can lift up to 10 times its body weight. Right? The diet of a gorilla is 98% basically plant matter, right? Leaves, branches, roots. They have 2%, 1 to 2% maybe, that's caterpillars and larvae, but they are not meat eaters. And no one has ever looked at a gorilla and said that a gorilla suffers from protein deficiency. And if we look at other examples within the animal kingdom, right, the elephant, the bison or buffalo, horse, you don't look at these animals and say that they are suffering from protein deficiency. In fact, in my entire medical career, I've never seen someone in the United States that suffers from protein deficiency. It's just not something that we see. This is Frank Medrano. He is a bodybuilder, a calisthenic expert, and this is him today. And he has all sorts of videos that you can go online and look at of just these insane demonstrations of muscle strength and control. And you would not look at Frank Medrano and say that he suffers from protein deficiency. This is what he said about his diet. I thought I was healthy and strong before, but after adopting a plant-based diet, I started to feel energetic and I was having quicker recovery after training. The bottom line is you will get adequate protein on a whole food plant-based diet. The most recent example that I wanted to share is Tom Brady. He's a 5-time Super Bowl champion now. I just learned recently that Tom Brady eats a whole food plant-based diet. This is him pictured with his wife, Giselle. And as he describes what they eat 80% of their diet comes from those 4 food groups that we just talked about: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And here you see Giselle pictured with a bowl of soup with broccoli and potatoes. This is a picture of their daughter, Vivian, slurping down a green smoothie. Okay, so I think you all have a good intuitive sense for what is a whole food plant-based diet, right? Eat food, not too much, mostly plants, from the 4 main new food groups: fruits, vegetables, legumes, and grains. So this raises the question, why? Well, why should I go ahead and adopt this way of eating? The fact is, if America was healthy, if we were doing well as a nation, then there wouldn't be much need to discuss a plant-based diet. It would mean that whatever we were doing currently was working, but it's not. 2/3. So 2/3 of the United States is overweight or obese. Over 1/3 is obese. And despite the fact that we spend over $40 billion per year on dieting and diet-related products, 95% of us regain that weight within 1 to 5 years. All right, so clearly what we're doing in terms of dieting is not working. 50% of adults in the US either have prediabetes or diabetes, okay? And that has just continued to grow over the years. 1 out of every 2. 52 seconds. Every 52 seconds, an adult in the United States dies from heart disease, okay? This statistic keeps me up at night. I can't get over this. Whether it's a stroke, whether it's a heart attack. The total in a year is 610,000. In the course of this 1-hour presentation, 70 adults in the United States will have died from heart disease. And when we've looked at why this is the case, we don't have to look very far, right? On every street corner we have fast food: McDonald's, Taco Bell, Burger King, Pizza Hut. You check out of every aisle and you're met with a whole array of different types of candy. I was shopping at Best Buy the other day for electronics, right? And what am I met by is just a huge row of candy to buy on my way out. And I actually took a picture. I was at the Sonoma County Fair last summer, and I couldn't quite believe my eyes. See, now we've reached the point where a hamburger between 2 buns is no longer decadent enough. So we need to sandwich it between 2 Krispy Kreme donuts. This says, home of the Krispy Kreme burger, get it here. I had never seen this before, right? And, you know, the fact that we've had 2 Krispy Kreme donuts, that doesn't quite count as dessert because there was a burger in between it. So you don't have to go far, you just go to the next stand and you can get your dessert of deep fried Snickers or deep fried Oreos or marshmallow pops, right? Because an Oreo and a Snickers bar is just not quite enough for dessert. We need to deep fry it to really bring it home. More than 50% of the American diet is ultra processed. More than 50%, and to be exact, it's 58% of the American diet is ultra processed. So what exactly does that mean? I thought I'd read to you the definition from the study that performed this that was published in BMJ. So ultra processed are formulations of several ingredients which, besides salt, sugar, oils, and fats, include food substances not used in culinary preparations. In particular, flavors, colors, sweeteners, emulsifiers, and other additives used to imitate sensorial qualities of unprocessed or minimally processed foods and their culinary preparations, or to disguise undesirable qualities of the final product. More than 50% of what we eat comes from this kind of food. I wish I could say that the remainder was healthy plant-based foods, but it's not, right? Over 25% of our diet then comes from meat and dairy products such as cheese, steaks, chicken, eggs, right? Less than 10% of the American diet actually comes from fruits and vegetables. And most of that 10% is going to be things like fruit juice, right? Or French fries, because the potato would count as a vegetable. This book, Hungry Planet, the author and photographer went around the world to different countries, and they took a photo of what an average family in each of these countries eats during a week. This is the Revez family in North Carolina, and this is 1 week's worth of food for them. And as you can see, this is truly the standard American diet, right? We've got lots of pizza, lots of meat, we've got our instant ramen noodles, lots of fast food from Burger King, KFC, McDonald's, chips, sodas. Here's our 10% of fruit, right? So we've got some fruit juice here. Oh, and if you look really hard, you can see some potatoes and a few bunches of grapes. We've got our Budweiser, our Diet Coke, lots of milk. Right? It's an ultra-processed, fast food, heavy in meat and dairy American diet. And just contrast that with other countries around the world. All right? Not perfect, but just compare pictorially the difference. So if we looked at Egypt, this is the Ahmed family in Egypt. And just look at the colors, right? A lot more vegetables, fruits, we've got some bananas. Yes, there is some meat, yes, there's some soft drinks, but it's much, much less than what you just saw with the Revez family in the United States. This is Guatemala. Again, lots of fruits, vegetables. They've got rice. This is the Patkar family in India. Again, same thing. What you're struck by is a huge amount of fruits and vegetables, grains, and legumes. The average American adult in the US eats over 200 pounds of meat a year. And then contrast that with India, where the average adult eats 11 pounds of meat per year. This is our answer to our problem. This is our answer to the 2/3 of Americans that are overweight, obese, to the 50% that are pre-diabetic and diabetic, to the patients with heart attacks that are dying every 52 seconds. It's pills, right? And if it's not pills, it's procedures. This is a stent, and one of the most common procedures done in the United States is to put a stent in one of the vessels to the heart to open it. Studies have shown that stents for chronic coronary artery disease does nothing to extend the lifespan. So it is purely a Band-Aid. And if not stent, then we'll take it a step further and we'll do a coronary artery bypass graft surgery. We take a vein from the leg and use it to get around the arterial blockage in the heart. All right, we'll have to crack open the chest, do the surgery, and then sew it back together. So in this context comes a whole food plant-based diet. There is another way. And we could spend 8 hours, 16 hours, a whole week talking about the health benefits of a plant-based diet. There is literature dating back to the 1920s showing the benefits of a plant-based diet, but here's just a few. Healthier weight, improved cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, ultimately equating to less medication. Prevention and reversal of heart disease and diabetes, and I'll have more to say on that in a minute. May slow the progression of certain types of cancer, such as colon cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. And then last, improve symptoms from chronic illnesses such as gout, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and multiple sclerosis. And I thought I'd give you just a brief case study that was recently published. This was a nutrition update for physicians on plant-based diet. This came out in the Kaiser Permanente Journal, all right, and was written by a number of doctors in Southern California. And they presented an actual case study of theirs. So, excuse the acronyms, but I'll explain. So it was a 63-year-old male with high blood pressure, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, so high cholesterol, who came in with fatigue, nausea, and muscle cramps, okay? This was an actual patient who came to Kaiser Southern California. He was on these 4 medications: lisinopril, 40 milligrams daily, hydrochlorothiazide, 50 milligrams daily, amlodipine, which is a powerful blood pressure medication, 5 milligrams, and torvastatin, which is a very powerful cholesterol-lowering medication, 20 milligrams. At the doctor's office, he got a random blood glucose level, and it came back at 524. And just to give you a sense for how high that is, the cutoff for a random blood glucose level for a diagnosis of diabetes is 200. Okay, so this was off the charts. This was his new diagnosis of diabetes. Hemoglobin A1C came back 11.1%. Hemoglobin A1C is an average of your blood sugar for the last 2 to 3 months. It's yet another way that we diagnose diabetes. The cutoff for diagnosis of diabetes by hemoglobin A1C is 6.5%, and here he was at 11.1%. So this represents very poorly controlled diabetes, and this was his new diagnosis. His total cholesterol came back 283, despite the fact that he was on atorvastatin or Lipitor, which is one of the most powerful cholesterol-lowering medications. His blood pressure was 132/66. Not bad, but again, he was on 2 blood pressure medications, hydrochlorothiazide and lisinopril, right? This is what I mentioned earlier. That's an example of successful control of blood pressure. And then his BMI, his body mass index, was 25. 25, less than 25 is considered normal weight. 25 to 30 is considered overweight, and 30 to 35 is obese, and 35 and higher is morbidly obese. So he's just at that border between normal weight and overweight. So what did the doctor do? He, as a good, responsible physician, he started him on metformin, which is for diabetes. He started him on glipizide, which is for diabetes, and he started on NPH, which is a form of insulin, 10 units for his diabetes, right? He started him on 3 medications for diabetes. Why? Because this patient was very poorly controlled, and he wanted to get his blood sugars under better control. But he also started him on a whole food plant-based diet and advised him to exercise daily. So let's fast forward 4 months. Okay, let's just fast forward 4 months. 4 months later, in terms of blood pressure, he was off the amlodipine. He was off the hydrochlorothiazide. He had decreased his lisinopril from 40 milligrams all the way down to 5 milligrams. And despite that, his blood pressure was lower than when he first came in, 132/66 down to 125/60. In terms of his diabetes, right? Remember, he came in poorly controlled. He stopped the glipizide. He completely came off the insulin, and his A1C went from 11.1% down to 6.3%. His new A1C did not even meet criteria for diagnosis of diabetes. In essence, in 4 months, he had reversed his diabetes and had come off of insulin and had come off of glipizide. All he was left on was metformin. And then finally, in terms of his cholesterol, he did stay on the Lipitor, but he dropped his cholesterol from 283 down to 138. All right. You can begin to see that the beauty of a plant-based diet is not that it just treats one condition, right? It's not like a blood pressure medication or a diabetes medication that just specifically treats that condition. This is the magic pill, so to speak, that you put on the end of your fork every day that treats all conditions. And this is a cartoon that I'll never forget. It was early on when I first learned about plant-based medicine. Dr. Dean Ornish, who is another pioneer in the field, he gave a lecture at a plant-based conference in San Diego. And he started off with this cartoon, and it has stuck with me ever since. What this is a picture of 2 doctors who are mopping up the floor. okay? And if you look in the background, the sink, the faucet is still on. It's just pouring water out. What this represents is the state of modern medicine today. We are mopping up the floor. We're mopping up the floor with glipizide, metformin, lisinopril, hydrochlorothiazide, stents, CABG, coronary artery bypass graft surgeries. And meanwhile, we're not addressing the root cause. So as we're putting in Krispy Kreme burgers, as we're putting in the candy from the checkout aisle, the faucet keeps running. And so we're literally just playing catch up, okay? And what a plant-based diet does is it addresses the root cause. Finally, we are turning off the faucet so that we don't have to keep mopping up the floor. I wanted to focus a little bit on coronary artery disease since it is the #1 killer of men and women in the United States and globally, right? As I mentioned, every 52 seconds, one US adult dies from this disease. This is Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. He's a general surgeon. He practices at the Cleveland Clinic. And he became very disenchanted with the state of modern medicine. He felt like we were essentially mopping up the floor, just like that cartoon that Dr. Dean Ornish presented earlier showed. And when he did the research, he came to the inescapable conclusion that a whole food plant-based diet was the solution. And so what he did is he went to the cardiology department at the Cleveland Clinic and asked them to send him their most difficult, challenging patients with heart disease, okay? And they sent him 18 patients who, in the 8 years before he started his study, suffered 49 coronary events. These patients were very sick. In the 8 years leading up to the start of his study, they suffered a total of 49 coronary events. 49 coronary events in 18 patients, right? That's an average of almost between 2 to 3 events. And these events included things like increased angina or worsening chest pain, angiographic disease progression, so progression of the blockages of their coronary arteries, bypass surgery, infarctions or heart attacks, strokes, angioplasty, that procedure I mentioned earlier, where we put a stent in the arteries to the heart to open it up, or worsening stress test. People who were put on treadmills and were evaluated for what their exercise capacity was. And he put them on a simple study intervention, a diet consisting exclusively of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, and lentils, while at the same time excluding all meat, dairy, and oil. And he followed these 18 individuals for 12 years after the study was done. And remember, right, 48 coronary events in the 8 years leading up to it. In the 12 years following, zero coronary events. Most people would expect that many of them would have died, or certainly that they would have at least the same number of events, if not more, okay? And instead, all but one patient died of an arrhythmia at the 5-year mark. But 12 years later, 17 patients still alive with 0 coronary events. And if we look at actual imaging, this was from one of the patients. This is the angiography done in November of 1996. What you see here, distal LAD stands for the distal left anterior descending artery. It's one of the main arteries of the heart. You can see it's nice and open, and then right here at the end of it, it gets very narrow, okay? In a repeat angiography done 3 years later, this is what it looks like, right? It has just opened wide up. And really what this shows is that you cannot just keep these lesions stable, you can actually reverse the heart disease. You can reverse the blockages in the arteries of your heart. Just another image, this is a nuclear scan, and what you're looking at here is sort of a cross-sectional view of the main chamber of the heart, the left ventricle. And the way to understand this is the red areas represent areas of good blood flow, and these sort of yellow, greenish, darkish areas, that represents areas of the heart that are not getting good blood flow, okay? This image was done just 3 weeks into the study for one of the patients. As you can see, look at this, nice good blood flow almost surrounding the entire heart. Well, right around this same time, Dr. Dean Ornish, who is yet another pioneer, and I mentioned earlier the cartoon that he showed, he was doing a similar kind of study, except that his was a randomized control trial. So he took 48 patients, okay, and he randomized half of them to the American Heart Association diet. And these were patients with significant heart disease, anywhere from 1 vessel to 3 vessel disease. And he randomized the other half of them to a low-fat, plant-based way of eating. In addition, he did things like stress reduction or mindfulness. He did things like having support groups to increase people's sense of connection with each other, and incorporated movement as well. And how he measured progress was he looked at the coronary arteries again and looked at the amount of blockage, okay? And here's what we see. So the control group, the group that was on the American Heart Association diet, right, getting conventional care by cardiology, their level of blockage in their coronary arteries went on average from 40.7%, and then at the 1-year mark to 42.3%, and then at the 5-year mark just continued to get worse, 51.9%. And then in contrast, here's the intervention group on the low-fat plant-based diet. 41.3%, they actually started off worse, right, with a greater degree of blockage than the control group. 1 year later, down to 38.5%, and then 5 years later, continued to go down to 37.3%. So again, what we see here is not just stabilization, but actual reversal of heart disease. Furthermore, there was a 91% decrease in the frequency and severity of angina or chest pain attacks in the intervention group on the low-fat plant-based diet. And in contrast, there was a 165% increase at the 1-year mark in the frequency and severity of angina attacks in the control group on the American Heart Association diet getting conventional cardiology care. And so it's for this reason that Dr. Kim Williams, president of the American College of Cardiology, when he looked at the research done by Dr. Esselstyn, by Dr. Ornish, and just to top it all off, he had a patient who he did a nuclear scan on, who came in with 3-vessel disease, and did a scan that basically showed that she had blockages. And then 6 months later, when he reevaluated her, essentially the scan showed reversal of her disease. And when he asked her how she had accomplished it, she had mentioned that she had learned of Dr. Dean Ornish and had went on the Ornish diet. And so with all of that in combination, he finally decided to try it on his own. And for all his life, his LDL, or his bad cholesterol, had been high. I think it was around like 190, 180, 190. And this was eating a healthy, what he believed to be a healthy diet, with lots of fish, lots of chicken, a decent amount of fruits and vegetables. And he decided to go 100% for a period of time. Well, just a few months later, when he rechecked his cholesterol, his LDL level was less than 100. Okay, it had dropped almost 100 points just in a matter of months. And so what he had believed prior was that it was just his genetics, and that was as much as he could do. And then within a few months, it changed. So he has now since gone completely 100% plant-based. And I love this quote of his. Wouldn't it be a laudable goal of the American College of Cardiology to put ourselves out of business, right? President Bill Clinton, he learned of the research of Drs. Ornish and Esselstyn. And as you can remember, during his presidency, he was famous for the standard American diet that he very much enjoyed, right? And as a result, 2004, he had a quadruple bypass surgery. And just 6 years later, when he was walking around New York, he experienced chest pain and was rushed to the hospital and had 2 stents placed. And so he reached that moment where he said, enough is enough, I can't continue and keep doing it this way. This is him now, 2015, just a couple years ago, right? He's over 20 pounds lighter. He adopted a whole food plant-based diet. And here he is showing off his lunch to the reporters. And he had this quote, I wanted to live to be a grandfather, so I decided to pick the diet that I thought would maximize my chances of long-term survival. So we don't have time to talk in depth about diabetes, but I did want to mention one study that is one of my favorite studies. Diabetic neuropathy, okay? Diabetic neuropathy is one of those chronic conditions that is very difficult to alleviate. We have all sorts of medications, gabapentin, Lyrica, and you know what? None of them truly work. Maybe they decrease your pain by 10% or 20%. Never do you ever see a patient coming in with diabetic neuropathy where you give them a medication and it goes away. Well, back in the 90s, Dr. Crane, he did a study on 21 patients with significant diabetic neuropathy that was extremely painful. And essentially what he did is he put them in a 25-day residential program, all right? And during that program, they ate a plant-based diet that was low in fat, less than 10% of the calories were from fat, and a moderate walking exercise program. At the end of 25 days, 17 of the 21 patients with significant diabetic neuropathy had 100% complete relief of their neuropathy without the aid of medications. And that's just talking about their neuropathy. Most of them were able to come off many of their medications for diabetes, including insulin. All of them lost weight. Cholesterols went down. Blood pressures went down. And what's even more interesting about this study is that they followed up with these same patients 3 to 4 years later. And with the exception of one of them, 100% of them had the same degree of relief from their neuropathy. Essentially, it was a thing of the past. And it just shows you that as you stay on this, right, it is sustainable and the results are sustainable as well. This is one of my favorite books, The Blue Zones, Lessons for Living Longer from the People Who've Lived the Longest, written by Dan Buettner, a journalist for National Geographic. And what Dan Buettner did is he went around the world and looked for places that have the highest percentage of centenarians, or people who live past 100. And not just people who live past 100, but people who are thriving and living full lives, okay, into their old age. And he identified 5 blue zones: Loma Linda, California; Nicoya in Costa Rica; Sardinia, Italy; Ikaria, Greece; and Okinawa, Japan. And he did over 250 interviews of these centenarians and essentially asked looked at their daily patterns, what they ate, how they moved, who they spent time with. And at the end of it all, he distilled principles, 9 power principles that he learned from these centenarians of what tied all these places together. And at the very top of the list was a plant-based diet. Okay? So when we get away from the studies and look for what's actually going on in the real world, we see that this is the diet that civilizations around the world across time are thriving on. So this is Dr. Ellsworth Wareham. He is one example of the centenarians from the Blue Zones. He lives in Loma Linda, California. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon. I believe today he's 104 years old. And he made the decision to go whole food plant-based about 30, 40 years ago when he was doing surgeries and realizing that all the blockages that he was seeing in the arteries, these were all in people eating the standard American diet. And he noticed that he would never find these in people eating a whole food plant-based diet. And so to this day, that is what he follows. He finally stopped assisting with surgeries at the age of 95. But there's an interview of him with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN, just describing how full and rich his life is. And as I mentioned, he's 103 or 104 today. So this quote from that study I mentioned, or that paper I mentioned earlier that was put out in the Kaiser Permanente Journal, I think really captures it. The future of healthcare will involve an evolution toward a paradigm where the prevention and treatment of disease is centered not on a pill or surgical procedure, but on another serving of fruits and vegetables. So we've talked about what a plant-based diet is, all right? We've talked about why we should adopt a whole food plant-based diet, looking at coronary artery disease, looking at diabetes and diabetic nephropathy, looking at people from around the world who are living well past 100 and thriving on a plant-based diet. This raises the question, how do I get started? All right, how do I get started on this? One big thing is to keep learning. Okay, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is meant as an introduction. It's meant to titillate your curiosity. But there is so much material out there. The Starch Solution, written by my mentor, Dr. John McDougall, is a great book for learning more and seeing the benefits of starches and beans and potatoes and legumes and introducing those into your diet. This is a good movie, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. Forks Over Knives is one of the movies that we recommend that all people, if they haven't watched, should definitely watch. It's an outstanding documentary on a whole food plant-based diet and really highlights the research of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who is the author of the China study. As I mentioned, Dr. Esselstyn, this book of his, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, really discusses the research behind that landmark study of his that showed reversal of heart disease in the patients that he worked with. And then you can start attending conferences. So the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference is an outstanding conference. I've been to it twice. And you basically get experts from all around the world discussing the many benefits of eating this way. But as you're learning, we got to actually start implementing, right? And really the first thing you have to do there is you've got to clear out your kitchen. So you've just got to get a big garbage bag and put all the foods that are not plant-based, that are going to be tempting you day in, day out if you're surrounding yourself with them. So the chips, the cookies, the meat, the eggs, the dairy, okay? You want to put it and get in a bag and get it out of the house. And then the flip side of that is you need to stock your kitchen, right? You need to stock your kitchen with plant-based foods that make it easy for you on a moment's notice to put together a meal. Here you see legumes and beans and pasta and lentils. You're going to want to stock it with fruits and vegetables. Critical to success is planning in advance, right? We live in a culture where our work days are extremely busy. And the fact is, if you are prepared in advance, you've taken the time to, on Sunday, plan what your meals are going to be for the week, and take the time to go grocery shopping and prep and cook, you're far more likely to be able to eat this way and be successful than if you just take it on a day-by-day basis. And then finally, you've got to do it. You've just got to jump in, and you can do all the planning you want, but at the end of the day, you've got to do it. Ideally with a partner, studies have shown that when you do it together in a group, your chances of success are far more likely than if you try and do it alone. Now, along the way, there's going to be times when you falter, right, or you go off the plan. And the key here is really to be resilient. So as Vince Lombardi said, it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. And if you end up eating something that is part of the standard American diet one day, then as Dr. Ornish would say, then the next day you eat healthier, okay? And you don't just continue to eat in an unhealthy manner. When I think of resilience, I think of Jason and Sarah Ramos. These were two patients I took care of recently here at True North. As Jason says, my current diet at the time, this was in 2014, consisted of mainly sheet cakes, ice cream, pizza, chicken wings, and hamburgers. And their husband and wife, they had together tried many different diets over the years, right? But they never gave up. They never gave up. They kept with it, they kept determined, and they knew that there was a better way. And eventually they learned about a whole food plant-based diet. So they've been on it, I believe, since 2014, 2015, and this is them today. Again, just another complete transformation. And I took care of them for over 4 weeks here at True North. If you could have seen the size of their plates in terms of the amount of food that they consumed, you would be shocked. And that's the beauty of this way of eating. I have never once ever told a patient that they need to count calories. This is not a caloric restriction or portion control kind of way of eating. If you put the right foods into your body, you basically eat as much as you want until you're satiated, okay? And despite eating as much as you want, this is the results. Within two to 3 years, right? They have essentially gone from a morbidly obese category to a normal weight. So to recap, we are not doing well as a nation in terms of health. Medications, procedures, and surgeries are not the answer. This is really simply mopping up the floor. And in order to turn off the faucet, we must adopt a whole food plant-based diet based primarily on whole or minimally processed fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. A whole food plant-based diet has the potential to not just prevent, okay, but actually reverse. That's the beauty of it. Reverse chronic illnesses such as heart disease and diabetes. In terms of next steps, continued learning is critical, and adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle ourselves and trying it out. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, right, over 2,000 years ago, really had it right. And somehow along the way, we got derailed and failed to listen to his wisdom. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. Now, I want to end with one final personal note. So, a lot of times, patients will say to me, you know, it's easy for you to say. You've probably eaten this way your whole life. You know, you probably grew up eating whole food, plant-based, and you don't know what it's like coming from the standard American diet and trying to eat this way. And that's when I laugh and say, oh, if only you knew. All the way up through the end of 5th grade, I was the most overweight kid in my grade. I remember it like it was yesterday, being in gym and PE and waiting until everyone in the locker room had finished changing before I changed, because I didn't want them to see me without my shirt on. I remember just absolutely being petrified of getting an invitation to a party and it being a swim party, right? And the times I did go to a swim party, I would jump in with my shirt on. And my friends would say, why are you jumping in with your shirt on? And I would say, well, because I'm cold, right? And I didn't get this way by accident, right? I very much enjoyed and partook in the standard American diet. So I remember being back in Singapore where my parents grew up one summer. And my mission was to go to every restaurant that had banana splits and basically get one at each meal and compare and decide which one was the best. And so, you know, eventually my diet improved slightly. But I will say that along the way, I have had missteps. So, you know, in the 80s, there was the whole fat-free craze. And in the fat-free paradigm, you could eat as much food as you want as long as it was fat-free. So, you know, the fat-free Entenmann's pies and the fat-free Entenmann's cookies, Twizzlers, gummy bears, Grove Stand orange juice. I would consume massive amounts of these thinking that that's healthy because it was zero fat. And then I'm embarrassed to say, but during residency, I went through the paleo phase, okay, where you could eat as much meat as you want, as long as you're avoiding carbs. And so I'm really proud. I was really proud at the time, but I knew about In-N-Out, and their off-menu item is the protein-style burger, right? It's their burger patties wrapped in lettuce instead of buns to avoid the carbohydrates. And I remember once going to In-N-Out, and I got not one, but 2 double patty protein-style burgers, all right? And yeah, so I went through the paleo diet for a couple of years. And it's only in the last few years that I've finally seen the light, so to speak, and entered what I truly believe is the final phase of my nutrition history, a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. And so I wanted to end with a demo that I think sort of highlights this, okay? Now this was a demonstration that I saw many years ago from a motivational speaker named Darren Hardy. And he was talking about this in reference to the pernicious influence of the news and television. And I've adapted this demonstration that he's done because it really struck me and sort of modified it to what I believe adopting a whole food plant-based diet represents, okay? So imagine this cup was me in my childhood, right? And eating corn dogs and Orange Julius and Wendy's Frosties, croissants, corned beef hash from Price Club, watching television, essentially just, right, filled with the standard American diet, and then even later, moving to the fat-free phase and the paleo, okay? And then I just want to show what I believe the power of a whole food plant-based diet is capable of, all right? It won't happen immediately, but day by day, as you put fruits of various colors, varieties, sizes, vegetables, starchy, non-starchy, legumes, beans, peas, lentils, whole grains, amaranth, buckwheat, barley, you're just cleansing from the inside out. People who have diabetes are reversing their diabetes. People who have high blood pressure are not just lowering their blood pressure with medications, but they're actually able to lower their blood pressure and come off their medications. And you're actually able to reverse whatever damage that you've done and accumulated over the years. And then at the end, what you're left with is a pure, clean glass of water. Thank you very much.